Welcome everyone to another Monday night Hakas Shir. Tonight we have started our Shir by Shmuel Kazen. The topic is a very interesting topic, the Kashrus of milk nowadays. We'll hear about some questions, shilas, about the Kashrus of milk, and whether or not, after this year, whether or not you'll be really allowed to drink milk anymore.
Only Reynolds.
They don't see bars for 100?
I saw 2 cases of milk on the steps when I came in.
Ready for your thigh.
There's no, you give a shit, you have to give a disclaimer. It's not, this is not sucked in. You have to ask a Rav. I'm like, hey, Rav. Rabbi Helmser asked me to speak, so I said I'll do it tonight because tonight's my father's yard site, so I guess the shir can be Zecher Nishmasai, Lil Nishmasai. And that's just it. So we'll jump right into it. If somebody wanted to have a chocolate milkshake made out of camel milk, you're allowed to? Oh, everybody knows you're not allowed to because it's a treifa animal and you can't drink the milk of a treifa animal. The Gemara in Kashrus on the Avad says not only you can't drink the milk from a treifa animal, you also cannot drink milk from animals that would be rendered treifas. Now, what makes an animal treif? As everybody knows, the Rambam in Machalos Asuros and Hilchos Shtita a little bit goes through 90 different simanim of what makes an animal treif that you have to check for. So if any of these problems exist in the behemoth, it's considered a treifa. Like the one parameter is if it's not going to live a full 12 months, then you know it's considered a treifa, and you can't drink its milk. So l'chayra, you'd think that you'd have to milk a cow or a sheep or a goat, and then check the cow and find out if it's a treifa cow. But nobody ever did such a thing because you wouldn't have milk and you would have an overabundance of flesh with nothing to do. So the Gemara in Chulin says you don't have to check all of the simanim. You only have to check. We rely on the concept of roiv. We know that most animals are not treifas. So therefore, if most animals are not treifas, the milk you're taking from a cow is considered, because roiv is considered to be kosher. Now we know that some animals have issues, and they could be sick and whatever, but because most animals, the roiv of animals wind up being kosher, so you don't have to check. You don't have to check each one. Now, there's also a concept in halacha called miyat hamatzi. The miyat hamatzi is simply translated as a significant minority. Significant minority means if a significant, sample of any said thing has an issue, so you have to check. You can't rely on roiv. The most famous one when it comes to animals, or one of the famous ones, is the Ramban Pasuk, and this is what we do today, is about the lungs. Everybody knows you go to the store. Everybody today, and always, only ate glatt kosher meat. What does glatt kosher meat mean? It says lungs of an animal are very prone to problems. They have holes in them, and they would render an animal treif. So we have to check the lungs of every single animal because we know lungs have a problem. So after they shech the animal, they also check the lungs to make sure they're kosher. In chickens, Zervin can tell you, there's also tzumas hagid and other stuff that they check for. And every morning they go through when they shech, and based on the roiv of what's going on, they know if the animals are kosher. Another very interesting concept of miyat hamatzoi, of a significant minority, is, let's say, bugs in produce or in fruit. Anybody wants to eat an orange, I don't know anybody who ever checked an orange for bugs, because 100% of oranges don't have bugs. On the other hand, raspberries and blackberries, most rabbanim and most commentators today say we shouldn't eat them because they're infested with bugs. But you have something in the middle, something like lettuce. Lettuce is prone to bugs. There's a miyat hamatzi that has bugs. So what do you do if you want to eat lettuce? So you have to check it. And if you make sure that there's no bugs in the lettuce, then you can eat the lettuce. Now, you have to remember, this checking of simanim, all these things, is only when it's shaykh. Meaning, what would happen if you shechted an animal and for whatever reason the lungs disappeared? What's the halacha of that flesh? So most poskim would say that because it's not there anymore, the lungs are not there, so l'chayr, you can assume that the lungs are kosher. So the question really is how much is miyat hamatzah? What is considered a significant minority? Is it 1%, is it 5%, 10%? So the baseline that is accepted today is anything over 10%. Some people say it's as high as 50, but really it's about 10%. Anytime you know that a sample of something has an issue with 10% of that sample, so you have to be concerned for that mix. Which is why, take an example of romaine lettuce. We know that lettuce is prone to bugs, so all lettuce or kale or whatever has to be checked. And there's some people, when it came to Pesach, they wouldn't use mar like romaine that we call, they would use other lettuce called endives or whatever, even though some people say it wasn't really mar, but because it had no bugs and the checking was much easier, so they use that. Because you have to be concerned for the miyat hamatzah. But you have to remember, miyat hamatzah is only when it's feasible. So like we said, if somebody loses the lungs, you can still eat the flesh. And this is why you don't have to check each cow. Miyat hamatzah only has to happen when it's feasible. If it's not feasible, you don't have to check it. So you don't have to milk a cow and then check it to see if it's kosher. It's not feasible to operate that way. We can assume that roiv cows are, turn out kosher, and roiv cows, you can drink them. Clear? I don't think it's overly complicated. It's pretty straightforward. All this.
So something over 10%, and even if the lungs would disappear or be straight.
Again.
If let's say the issue with lungs would be more than 10%.
Yeah.
So
it is more. It is. That's why you have to check it.
And if it disappears, we still say it's kosher because it's only miyat hamatzah.
It's not feasible to check it anymore. There's actually, I'll say soon, there's actually a case where there was a shochet in Prague. There was a rabbi. I think, what was his name? We'll get to it. There was a case. He didn't know that you had to check the lungs, and he did many behemoths. He checked it. He didn't check the lungs, and they passed him, based on it. So. Once upon a time, when you had a cow in your backyard, his name was Betsy or Aaron, whatever you named your cow, you went to your cow, you milked your cow, your goat, your sheep, and you drank the milk because most cows were kosher, and you relied on this concept of most cows are kosher, and you can drink the milk. But today, nobody goes to their backyard to drink their milk, to get their milk. There is in upstate New York in Swan Lake, the guy named Fall Franklin. He has an organic farm, and there are certain people who only drink their milk, his milk, whatever, because but today commercial creameries, commercial dairies, there's a place not far from here you can go take, maybe one day my sister will take you on a field trip to see how milk is made. And let's just say it's not so pretty. There's hundreds of cows that are milked together, and the milk goes from the cow into a cooling vat. From the cooling vat, for bacteria and whatever, it gets pumped into a tanker. The tanker takes it usually down the road to a processing facility where they add vitamins or they pasteurize it, homogenize it, and they put it in a carton and it comes to your door. Now, by all accounts, the issue is raised as follows. Of dairy cows that are shechted, after they finish giving milk, in America, in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, the number of trephus, the cows that turn out to be treif, is 50, 60, sometimes 90%. Okay, so you're taking milk from cows.
These cows were milked.
These cows.
Why is that different than the regular?
What's causing them to come treif?
So you'd have to ask a scientist or a veterinarian. I don't know. I would assume, and I don't like to make assumptions, but I would assume that the commercial dairies today, it's not the way Hashem set up the world for cows to produce milk. Cows are supposed to give milk to their calves, but now they milk cows 24 hours a day, many times. They get old, they get sick, they get pumped with antibiotics. There's also an issue of different surgeries that they do to reduce bloating or gas. But that we're talking that the bottom line is that there's a very high percentage, up to 90% in some places, of dairy cows that are trephus. So now, in your bottle, and look, it's not like you can say something is bucket or shishim. Even if you don't want to go into the whole concept of bittul is only minute, the Metzias is that in your bottle of milk that you're getting, there's a high percentage of the milk that's actually statistically coming from treif.
And ask maybe Shabbos Tom, why do they bother shechting these cows? Why don't they just finish their
Because they can't just put them into an oven and
let them put them to the sell to goyim. What do we care?
I don't know, they do. But I'm saying,
So
they want.
why is anyone checking them?
But the mitzias is that they want, that they have the designation of a treifa. I don't know if the cows that we eat for beef are different cows. They're Jersey cows, they're a whole different, they're much younger, and they're better taken care of. It's not, huh? Kiviyachol, exactly.
If you even if you say that 90% of the ones which are shechted after their lifespan of milk cow,
Yeah.
but how many of those cows
While they're giving milk, right?
while they're giving milk, how many of them are at that stage they're about to
So
retire?
we don't know.
Hey, well, I'm saying they're thinking 90%, lavdafka, that 90% is that 90% of your cows in this herd are now safe. 90% will become safe later.
Right, yeah. But the mitzias is that, right? So we have to.
What's the life of a dairy cow?
I think 5 or 6 years
If we
from when they
do
start
5 or 6
giving milk.
20%
Yeah.
a year
Yeah.
is 90% trick.
Yeah. After that, yeah. So
20% of a herd is, 90% of 20% of a herd is trick, is what you're saying.
something like that. Yeah. Anyway, so this issue, so like it never existed, like we said, when you're getting milk in your backyard or by your neighbor's farm. So this was actually raised in Kashrus. There was a Yidden B'nai Brak. His name was Gavril Yehuda Ilovich, and he maybe he went on a Chalmai trip or something happened, and he found out what was going on, and he said, I don't understand. He says it's not batal b'shishim. He says, how can you? This whole thing? He wrote it up, and he said he put it in this private school based Arm Yisrael that's published by the Karliner Chassidim. It was an issue Kuf Dalet, if you want to look it up. And he wrote it, and there was no like big firestorm about it. But then,
What year?
Tavshin Samach Gimel.
This is the problem. Even if it's just a miyut hamatzi, it's still a problem. Even if it's not really, the fact that you know for a fact.
So you know that there's a miyut hamatzi here in your bottle.
Right. It's not a.
It's not a miyut hamatzi, it's a roiv hamatzi.
It's not shayach
Right,
adjust.
right, exactly. It's not a roiv less riba less kamon. It's actually here.
So he said, I don't understand what's happening. So he wrote it, and then it was republished anonymously in Tzanzer Kovetz Habir. And from there, like in Eretz Yisrael, it turned into a massive firestorm, and there was a lot of back and forth, and Yonis and Zalman Nechemet Goldberg, and Richard Weiss, and a whole bunch of poskim started discussing back and forth, what's the mitzias? Like, do we have to hear about this statistic, or did not? It even came to America. This is Dr. J.D. Blythe from YU. He wrote it in maybe Hamar, and Michal Silberman wrote it in the RJJ Journal in English, and you can read all about it there. And, I mean, it was a real firestorm back and forth. But really, what is the question? The real question is, in halacha, when you have the concept of roiv, when you say after Rabban Lahatis, you have to go after the majority. The real question is, when you're going after the majority, do we account for the miyut at all? We say that the roiv is kosher, but there's still a significant miyut, or do we say the roiv becomes everything, and we never think about the mitzias of the miyut? And that's really the question of how we're going to come to a conclusion, or how the Rabbanim came to a conclusion, how they said why it is or why it isn't. So the real question is, when you're dealing with roiv, does the miyut exist or not? Right? So if you say you can't ignore the facts, so that in every milk carton that you pick up from the store, there's treifa milk. But if you say that the roiv becomes everything, and the roiv is everything, so if the roiv is everything, I don't care statistically what's in the bottle. The mitzias is the roiv is the roiv, and
You say just like each cow individually, I would be allowed to drink the milk.
Right, because it's
therefore, even if it's not everything.
Another example, like when it comes to Chilul Shabbos for color, right? So everybody knows that there's different shittas. And the other takes one sheet, and most places can take another sheet. Like you see it in Hatzalah, in Crown Heights, and other places. Like when you have to be Mamayat Chilul Shabbos, or is Shabbos entirely suspended for the doctor or for the Chavar Hatzalah? Right. So other communities they have goyish drivers. Say, what does a yid have to drive on Shabbos for? You can have a goy, he can drive the ambulance. The yid can be Mamayat Chilul Shabbos. It doesn't have to. Every malach it doesn't have to do. And others say, no, it's not the pshat that you have to be a mamayat chil Shabbos. Shabbos ceased to exist during this emergency. So do you say Shabbos is suspended and you don't have to worry about individual malachas, or do you still have to worry, it's still Shabbos, and you have to worry about each individual malach and be mamayat as much as possible? So the real question is, how do you deal with Roiv? And do we still need to consider Rita? And in the Gilyonis and in the Shas and Shuvas and the back and forth, there was a whole lot of back and forth on how we deal with it and what actually happens and like what's the mechanism. What's the mechanism? So this Yerman and Bnei Brak, Rabbi Ilovich, so he quoted from the Mishkanis Yaakov. And the Mishkanis Yaakov is an interesting beer on the Gemara Psachim on Daf Samach Hey maybe. There it says that Erev Pesach, when they finish shechting all of the karbanas, so at the end of the day, they would take one pitcher to the floor from all the blood. They would take the pitcher of blood and they would sprinkle it on the mizbeach. What was the reason for sprinkling the pitcher of the blood on the mizbeach? We know if somebody's carbon blood wasn't sprinkled, so he wasn't yet to the mitzvah carbon Pesach. So in case somebody's carbon's blood wasn't sprinkled, they took one pitcher, a mix of all of the blood from the floor, and they sprinkled it as a catch-all onto the mizbeach to try and make sure that everybody's carbon will have been sprinkled. So what does this tell you? So he is that in the Beis HaMikdash there was no treifus. Had there been treifus, you would never be able to sprinkle the blood, because now I sprinkle the blood of a treifa carbon on the mizbeach. So with the Agashlop, then they said that no, you have to think about it practically. When did they sprinkle the blood from the pitcher from all the karbanas? They did it at the end of the day. What was the end of the day? The end of the day was after they checked all the karbanas and they saw that there was no treifa. Even if there was a treifa, it's this bottle, and you see that you don't have to worry about the miyot, and you can just go with the right. Another example is in Shulchan Aruch in Yerdei and Siman Pei Aleph and Pei Beis. It talks about if you found out that cheese was made from milk, the heart of it was treif. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if there's 60 other cows in the herd where the milk came from, they made the cheese, you don't have to worry about the treif of cheese and you don't have to worry about the treif of milk and the cheese. Just also the shaila, you have a miyat hamatzoi of lungs. Everybody agrees. How can you say only 60 cows in the herd you can be mevatel? From here you see clear the Shulchan Aruch holds the chlal can't be goyrus b'miyah. Saying you have 60 cows, we know 10 or 15% of those cows' lungs would have issues, or the milk, cheese, whatever it came from. You know they have issues, but we say no. The cheese is kosher. We say the treif of milk is not in this cheese. It went somewhere else. The guy somewhere else is drinking it. And to your point before, Tfu Ashar, Chelik 1, was a Rav in Prague, and he had an issue. A shaykh didn't know about checking the lungs. How it's possible? Like practically, I can't tell you. I don't know how it's possible. But the lungs, he didn't know they were checked, and behemoths were checked, and the lungs were checked. What do you do with these lungs? So he said it's like the case of a lung that was lost, and we know that most behemoths are kosher, and this 10% we're not concerned about. The 10% statistics don't exist here. So you go with the thing. The 10% doesn't exist, and the lungs that weren't checked, you can eat the flesh from there was another Yerman, his name was Yechiel Halpern, and he wrote a very fascinating thing from the Agodas Hashri. I didn't have a chance to check it, so I know that everybody have questions on it, but he brought up if there's a place that you know behemoths are susceptible to being treif. Are you allowed to shech the behemoth there on Yontif for tzorech echel nefesh? What do you say? You're allowed to shech the behemoth for tzorech echel nefesh on Yontif when you know most behemoths are treif? Are going to turn out treif? Or you're not allowed to shech the behemoth because it's going to be treif and you're doing a chal Yontif for sheching the behemoth. So he says, everybody knows you're not allowed to shech the behemoth because it's Yontif, and you can't just shech the behemoth when you know it's a high probability that there's going to be a treif. He says, there's no specific isser for milking that behemoth, even though you can't drink the milk on Yontif. He says the isser in correlation to the shchita, says the milk is not the same kind of isser for in that kind of thing. Like I said, I'm not so 100% clear on that because I'm a little confused about it. I'm not putting milk on everything with him on Yom Tov, but he says, the Mishnah says, you don't care for the meat. And back and forth and back, and if you ever have time and you want to read it, it's really good neutral material that you can read and koch, and you get like a lot of peripheral information and a lot of kvoidim, kaimim, and whatever. But
Is there any maskana that says like a machmer shouldn't be drinking milk these days?
Herschel Schechter from YU. I'll get to it in a second.
Oh.
No, but he.
I'm just curious.
He actually, because also Moshe has. I'll get to it soon. But here's the bottom line, and this is really what I think. This is what came out from all the back and forth and all the gilyonis and the halacha and the thing. Basically, it all goes back to Chassam Sofer, who says, but by way of introduction, we have a rule that 8 echad can't override a chazaka. Okay, if we know a restaurant is treif, right? A few months ago we knew it was a restaurant is treif, right? In New Jersey. So everybody knows a certain restaurant, right, Goldstein's Deli. Everybody knows it's not kosher, right? One person came and said, chazaka, Goldstein's Deli is not kosher. Somebody came and said, I'm telling you, Goldstein's Deli is kosher. You can eat there or not. Of course you can't eat there, because 8 echad can't override a chazaka. Right? But we do know that Roiv could override a chazaka. Huh? Roiv has more weight than an 8 echad. What's a case of Roiv having more weight than an 8 echad? It's a very famous case. Everybody's going to learn eventually when you get to that masechta. If you have 10 pieces of flesh, 9 came from a treifa shop, and 1 came from a kosher shop, and we don't know which is which. If an 8 echad comes and says this piece of flesh is kosher, we believe him. How can an 8 echad override the roiv? The answer simply is he's not overriding the roiv. It's because he's saying edus on the miyut. He's saying this piece of flesh is from the miyut, and I'm just being megala to you what's already there. Clear? So this being megala, what's already there, only works when there's an identified miyut. Okay? If there's an identified minority, an 8 echad can say, on this miyut, this is the miyut, and we can accept it. So the 8 echad can override the roiv when he's saying edus and being megala something on the miyut. In the case of the behemoths that are used for dairy, the easiest is, there's no identified miyut. You don't know which cows are treif and which cows are not. So even if you have a chazaka at some point later on that there's going to be treif milk because the shlutas wind up being treif, says you have no identified minority of treifas. And the Chassam Sofer goes as far as to say, he says there may not be a single treifa animal in existence today in the world besides the treifas that we've already seen. Meaning that you can't say that an animal, because of a statistic, is going to be treif. There's no treif animal in the world besides the animal that we already saw that it turned out to be treif. We don't care about the minority, even though statistically is an issue. Until you can prove that this cow is treif, it's still kosher. We'd only look at the reality of the roiv, and you can say that the milk is kosher because you don't have an identified minority. So this guy...
Once it becomes a roiv, we will look at the statistic, though. You're saying if it was more than 50%, then we would look at the statistic.
We're not talking about 50%.
Right, but you're not saying we don't ignore statistics completely, it's just only when it's a miyat hamatzah that we don't.
Yeah, because it's less than the roiv.
What's the concept of milk?
No, he's not talking about milk, but he was using this is...
Right,
he was,
what's the concept?
I have to go back.
Right. Just the smart.
Yeah. No, he's saying based on this svar that you can say edus on a miyut. If there's no identified miyut, then we don't have to worry about.
There's no way to tell a treif until after you check it.
You could statistically get a CAT scan or an MRI and scan the animal, but it doesn't exist.
They can't afford to feed a normal, they're not gonna.
What do you mean? Well, why should they? Well, why should a Goyish farmer or dairy operator care about it? I mean, he's making milk. You know, like the golden goose, I mean, it's a real thing. The goose that laid golden eggs. If it's making money, the cow, I'm not going to look for problems. They don't have MRIs for cows. Today, Like a person, Hashem gets sick, so you go to a doctor, do everything to do to save a cow. A cow gets sick, okay, they shecht it and they, whatever, done. But there's no incentive to spend money on cows. So until you can prove that the cow is treif, you only look at the reality and you say, there's kosher. So Ilovich in Bnei Brak and Herschel Schachter in YU say that Herschel Schachter said he doesn't understand how people can still drink milk. He wrote a letter, I think Tafshin Samach Dala, the year after it was like brewing for a whole thing. The letter is actually dated from the 4th night of Hanukkah. He says, there's a clear idea here that there's treif of milk in the bottle. He's like, statistics, I know Roiv and I know how it works, but there's actual treif of milk in the bottle, and I'm not sure how you drink milk, and Hitaka stopped drinking milk. But, to his credit, he tried to find the limit schos on everybody who still drinks milk in his own thing, and he said that there's a machlokes of Rashi and Tosfos about why sirchus, lesions on the lungs of an animal, are problematic. Glatt kosher means that the lung was entirely smooth, right? So sometimes you go to a store, you'll see it says Beis Yosef glatt. What's the difference? And sometimes, like, if somebody's uneducated, you say, oh, Beis Yosef glatt, I don't want to have that because I don't know what Beis Yosef holds. Maybe it's more makel, maybe it's no good. It's not Lubavitch. But the reality is, Beis Yosef means that the lung was entirely glatt without issue. Regular glatt could mean that there was a sirch on the lung, but when they cut it off and they checked it, there was no hole underneath. And that's what glatt means. That the Mitzvah says right now it's glatt. Beis Yosef is like a higher level, there was no surface at all on the lungs. He says, what's the machlokes Rashi tells you, what's the problem of lesions b'chlal? Why are we concerned? You don't see an actual hole, you see a lesion. So you take it up, you put it on the thing, you blow it up, and the issue is Rashi says, under a lesion, there's really a hole that you can't see. And Tosfos says it's not pshat that there's a hole that you can't see, but Tosfos holds that in the future, in this place, there will be a hole. So according to Tosfos, the sirch on the lung now doesn't indicate a treif, and in theory you can eat it. He says maybe there's a mitzvah say not to eat it because kol chaya le'seichelu, and it's this or not something else, but the meat is not technically awesome. So he says according to this, everything that we're talking about is a possibility. This is Herschel Schachter's finish that he tried to be involved. So he says there's a possibility that the cow is going to be treif, but right now, according to Tosfos, the cow is not treif, so you guys can do whatever you want. He's like, I'm not getting involved. So Menashe Klein of Yisrael said, like he didn't want to get involved in the whole back and forth, and he said that the only thing he knows is that Roiv, and the concept of Roiv is a foundational part of halacha, and you can't ignore it. And you can't come to me with statistics and back and forth, and he says Roiv is...
Statistics, I'm confused about that.
Roiv means majority.
And statistics is also majority.
No, well, it's a number. It's not a majority number. As if you went over 51%,
Right.
I think we'd be having a different conversation.
But it
So
is.
we're saying we're not over 51% of.
I'm sorry?
We're saying it's almost 90%.
No, but not necessarily from those that we're getting. Eventually, when they're shafted. But the bottom line is, in regards to an
So we're
entire...
not sure that we're even getting 60%.
It could be 12%, it could be 10%, it could be 25%. I think if it was much, much higher, I think it would be a different conversation. I
If it
think,
was less than
like
Shmuel, would be
Rabbi
a problem.
Copeland said, he said we're talking 90%
more
of
than
a herd of
100%.
200,
Right.
exactly, is...
More than
What do you say, 20%?
90 to 20.
Huh?
90% of the 20%, which is
Okay, so we're talking about 20%, we're not talking like that.
Right. Or 10%.
So-
Right.
So, in regards to a whole nother topic in Baba Kama, not related to this, and this is a translation from Moshe Feinstein. He says, in applying the concept of kol de parish meruba parish, which basically translates that anything that gets separated from any segment, we assume it gets separated from the majority. So he says, according to this, he says, Svaras b'nei Adam should be totally, this is translation, Svaras b'nei Adam should be totally ignored. And he finishes with the following short statement. He says, he who doesn't wish to rely upon the laws of Parish Meruba because of reasons of human intellect is as if he disputes the Torah chas v'shalom. So if you want to say that, I understand the concept of Roiv and I understand statistics, but it doesn't make sense like what Herschel Schachter was saying. Moshe Feinstein was saying back then in a different sugi, Baba Kamas, is that if you try to apply Seichel Anushi to the concept of Kol the Parish, Meruba Parish, it's impossible, and you're not, and you can't.
Is this the Machlekes in the lower east side and the upper east side?
West side.
West
No, to his credit, Herschel Schachter, I don't know if you ever listened to Shurim, he's like a very he almost doesn't even have like an ego. He's like, whatever, he's like, he tries to, things like, so in his house, he says his wife still drinks milk and she still has butter and cream cheese and whatever. He says, maybe you can say, I'm an Ashkenazi Yid, from thing, and I have stomach pains from milk, so I stopped drinking it for that reason. I don't want to go into the thing. He said, but to him it doesn't make sense. Almost like when there was a story in Los Angeles a bunch of years ago with the treif flesh in the butcher store. So the RCC that was giving the hashgacha then was before Pesach, and they said that any flesh that was bought before noon is kosher. Any flesh that was bought after noon shouldn't be consumed, based on whatever formula they used to come up with this thing. Somebody asked Rabbi Reichel from Los Angeles, what should we do? So he says, you know what you should do. I don't know why you're asking me, but I'll tell you. He says, when you come to Mila after 120, and you say, what about this flesh? You bought 1159? Well done. Why you? So I think Herschel Schachter almost, he's like, I'm not telling people what to, I'm not paskening, I'm not thinking. He's like, I have it in my house, my family drinks it. He says, personally, I don't want to have it. And like he said, that first Shavuos, it was like a whole deal, the cheesecake, because it's like so, it's like Torah Sinai almost, the cheesecake, so it was like a little struggle for him, whatever. But anyway, but there was one other individual in Yisrael, Rabbi Weiss, who said that this whole brouhaha and this whole thing and all these Gulenas, he said it doesn't even get off the ground. This is B'chlal Hevtzach Nishan. I don't know if based on that, but the same concept that Rav Moshe said, called the Parish Meruba Parish, that anything that gets separated from the majority. He says you can assume you only got kosher milk, all the treifa milk went to a goy in a different bottle. And he says he'll prove it to you. He says if you have a city that's Rubam Yehudim, it's 70% of Yehudim. And for whatever reason, one morning, between the two local hospitals and the fire station, 10 newborn babies were dropped off for adoption at the foot of the firehouse or at the hospital. 10 of them. 13 years down the line, these 10 babies, 70% Jewish city. These 10 babies have a bar mitzvah, because they grew up in a Jewish city. Are they Yidden or not? They have to go through Gir al-Chumrah. What's the halacha?
They have a birth?
They had a birth, sure. It says the halacha is very simply that called the parish Meruba Parish, every single one of these kids is 100% Jewish, even though you know statistically that 3 of them are Goyim. He says, but if you apply the concept of called the parish Meruba Parish, that everything that's separated is separated from the majority, there's no issue. These 3 kids, even though you can say almost for certain that 3 of them are Goyim based on statistics, says you don't accept it. And you only go after the Roiv and call the parish Meruba Parish. You're going to say, in my head it doesn't make sense. There's 3 Goyish kids out of these 10. It doesn't matter. So the Mitzvah says halacha dictates. It's not what your own faithful tries to come up with. It's what Torah says and what halacha is. He says the same thing with the milk. He says anything that gets separated, milk was separated from a cow. The halacha still states that Roiv cows are kosher, and if Roiv cows are kosher, any milk that was separated from a cow is kosher. That's the whole story.
Enjoy it. So we have one cow. One milk for that cow. How do you know if that's